A pilot gave up on his jet, ejected, walked away in a parachute, and the plane he abandoned did something no plane is supposed to do. It landed itself. Perfectly. February 2nd, 1970, over the frozen plains of Montana, an empty fighter jet with the serial number 58-0787 glided down and set itself gently onto a snowy field, engine still humming, like it never needed a human at all. Think about that for a second. The pilot quit. The machine finished the job. And here's the part that breaks your brain completely. It wasn't a computer. It wasn't autopilot. There was no smart system flying that thing. It was pure physics, wind, and one impossible stroke of luck, stacking on top of another until a broken jet turned into a legend. First Lieutenant Gary Foust wasn't flying anything fancy that morning. He was in an F-106 Delta Dart, an interceptor built for one job: chase down enemy bombers and shoot them out of the sky. Fast, deadly, supersonic. He was running a training flight, the kind pilots do 1,000 times. Then something went wrong at 35,000 feet. The jet snapped into a flat spin. If you don't know what that is, picture a plate spinning flat on a table, dropping out of the air, nose barely tilted, wings useless. That's a death sentence in a fighter. The controls stop meaning anything. You pull, nothing answers. Faust did what he was trained to do. He deployed the tail parachute to yank the nose down and break the spin. And the parachute wrapped itself around the tail. Useless. Now he's falling in a machine that won't respond, with the one tool meant to save it tangled and dead behind him. What would you do? He did the only thing left. At 15,000 feet, Foust pulled the handle and ejected. The canopy blew off. The seat fired him clear, and he was suddenly hanging in the freezing sky, watching his jet spiral toward the ground below him. Done. He'd written that aircraft off. In his mind, it was already a smoking hole in a Montana field. And who could blame him? Every rule, every instinct, every training manual says the same thing. When a jet goes into an unrecoverable flat spin, you get out or you die with it. He chose to live. That's not cowardice. That's survival. But the story everyone tells about giving up misses the most surprising part entirely. Because the moment he left that cockpit, he accidentally saved the plane. So how does a pilot ejecting actually rescue the jet he just abandoned? Subscribe to the channel, because the strangest survival stories in aviation almost never happen the way you'd expect. Here's the physics that nobody planned. When Faust's ejection seat fired, two things happened at the exact same instant. First, his body weight left the front of the aircraft, which shifted the jet's center of gravity backward. Second, the force of that ejection seat blasting upward gave the nose a hard shove. And those two accidents, combined with the trim settings Faust had left dialed into the controls, did what the tail parachute never could. The nose dropped. The wings caught air again, and the flat spin stopped. And the F-106, now empty, leveled out into smooth, controlled flight. No hands on the stick, no feet on the pedals, nobody breathing inside it. Just a fighter jet flying straight and steady through the Montana sky, cruising along at 175 knots like it had somewhere important to be. Now picture the scene from the air. Faust's fellow pilot, James Lowe, was up there watching all of this unfold. He'd seen his friend eject. He'd braced for the crash. Instead, he watched the pilotless jet settle into calm, level flight beside him. And Lowe, with the kind of dark humor only a fighter pilot has, keyed his radio and said the line that made this whole thing immortal. "Gary, you better get back in it! Get back in it!" As if Faust could just hop across the sky and climb back into a plane that was flying better without him than it ever flew with him. That's the moment this stopped being a mayday and became a story people would tell for the next 50 years. Meanwhile, on the ground, Faust had his own problem. He'd floated down safely under his parachute, but he came down in the mountains, in the snow, in the kind of cold that kills you slowly if nobody comes. And nobody official was close enough. So who saved the man who ejected? Local citizens. Regular people from the area grabbed their snowmobiles and rode up into the freezing hills to pull an Air Force pilot out of the wilderness. No rescue helicopter swooping in, just neighbors on snowmobiles, engines screaming through the drifts, hauling a stranger back to warmth. He was fine. Cold, shaken, alive. The jet he'd just left for dead was about to make its own gentle landing a few miles away. That jet came down near Big Sandy, Montana. And it didn't crash. It didn't cartwheel or explode or dig a crater. It slid onto its belly across a snow-covered wheat field, smooth as a sled, and stopped. Belly landing. No landing gear, no pilot, barely a scratch. And it earned itself a nickname that stuck forever, the Cornfield Bomber, even though there's no cornfield. And it was never a bomber. It was a fighter that landed in a field of snow-buried wheat. But try telling that to history. The name was too good. It stuck. If this story is already giving you chills, take 1 second to hit that like button. It genuinely pushes this video out to more people who love the strange corners of history most folks never hear about. When the local sheriff and a handful of residents came trudging up to inspect this fallen jet, they found something that made their skin crawl a little. The engine was still running, still idling away in the snow, and the radar in the nose was still sweeping the sky, still hunting for targets that weren't there. Like the machine hadn't gotten the message that its pilot was gone. An empty fighter, sitting in a field, quietly searching for enemies. How does that not feel alive? The sheriff, being a practical man, decided he'd climb up and shut the thing off himself. Reasonable plan. It did not go reasonable, because that engine was hot, blazing hot, and it was sitting on top of snow. So the heat pouring off it started melting the ground underneath, turning solid snow into slick water and mud, and the jet, sitting on that slippery melt, began to slide forward on its own. With the sheriff halfway up the side of it, he scrambled down that aircraft faster than he'd climbed up, watching an unpiloted supersonic fighter creep across a Montana field, like it was trying to take off one more time. Hard to believe. The man came to switch off a machine, and the machine started chasing him instead. So what do you do with a jet that won't stop running and won't stop moving? The sheriff called the airbase for instructions, and the answer he got was almost hilariously calm. Just let it run. Let the engine idle until it burns through every last drop of fuel and quits on its own. So that's exactly what they did. They stood in the snow and waited. And that engine kept running for 1 hour and 45 minutes before it finally coughed, sputtered, and went silent. Nearly 2 hours. An empty fighter jet idling in a wheat field, while a small crowd of Montana locals stood around watching it slowly run itself dry. That's it. That's how the wildest flight of the day ended. Not with a bang, with a slow, quiet fade to empty. Now here's what should have happened next. The jet should have been scrap. A total write-off. A machine that spun out at 35,000 feet got abandoned midair and belly flopped into a frozen field with no pilot and no landing gear? You'd expect a twisted wreck fit for the junkyard. Wrong. The damage was so minor it barely counted. The airframe was intact. The systems held. And instead of hauling it off as trash, the Air Force did something almost unthinkable. They repaired it. They patched up the belly, checked the systems, and put serial number 58-0787 right back into active service. The jet that flew itself down came back to fly again. And it didn't fly for a year or two. It flew for 16 more years. 16. This aircraft went right back to doing its job, patrolling the skies, running interceptions, training pilots, decade after decade. As if that snowy morning in Montana had been nothing more than a strange dream. Think about the pilots who climbed into that cockpit over those years, most of them probably having no clue they were strapping into the most famous self-landing jet in history. But one pilot knew exactly what he was sitting in. 9 years after Gary Foust ejected from that spinning jet and left it for dead over Montana, he got a routine training assignment in 1979. A jet was picked for him. Standard procedure, random selection, nothing special about it. Except when Foust checked the serial number, his stomach must have dropped straight through the floor. 58-0787, the exact same aircraft. The one he'd abandoned in the sky 9 years earlier was now his to fly again. Out of every jet in the fleet, they handed him that one. How does that even happen? What are the odds? The man who gave up on that plane climbed back into it, sat in the same cockpit, wrapped his hands around the same controls, and flew the machine that once flew itself without him. If James Lowe's radio joke had been prophecy, This was the punchline 9 years in the making. Gary, you'd better get back in it. And eventually, he did. So what happens to a jet like that when its flying days are finally over? In August 1986, the Air Force retired 580787 for good. But you don't send a plane like this to the scrapyard. Not this one. Not the fighter that stopped its own spin, glided down at 175 knots, landed itself in the snow, chased a sheriff across a field, and outlived the whole panic to fly for 16 more years. They sent it somewhere it would be seen. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. And that's exactly where it sits today, parked inside the Cold War gallery, its metal skin still carrying the memory of the day it saved itself. Gary Fust, by the way, went on to retire as a major. He lived a full career in the skies. But no matter what else he did, his name will forever be tied to the morning. He pulled the ejection handle and, without meaning to, gifted his aircraft the one shove it needed to survive. He didn't fail that day. He accidentally became part of one of aviation's most unusual rescues, where the person saved and the thing that saved itself traded places outright. That's the whole story. A pilot gave up. A machine took over. And physics, not a computer, not a hero, just cold, hard physics, flew a fighter jet safely to the ground while its pilot floated helplessly above it. If this one stuck with you, if it made you look at that line between man and machine a little differently, hit like and subscribe, because history is packed with rare moments like this. And there's so much more waiting to be uncovered.